The new moon in Gemini will bring whirling winds of change, full of innovative ideas to cultivate and develop in the months ahead. There will be an abundance of imaginal material to be both inspired by as well as derive insights from. Yet, due to the rapid acceleration and changes happening all around the world in systemic structures, economic policies, geopolitical alliances, technological innovations, there has just been so much change happening so fast, much of which has been deeply concerning for many people. That when you combine all of these great changes happening with this big activation of Gemini and the air element and mental energies and ideas, it also means that our anxieties and fears and mental concerns can also become overwhelming. And so, another big part of this Gemini new moon is going to be making sure that you are putting into place some practices to calm nerves and ground and center so you can fully embrace the way things are changing and use the Gemini new moon to help you clarify the way things have been changing for you and to set into place the changes that need to be made, the modifications to plans and goals, and the development of cunning and effective strategies that can help bring you greater success and support, because there really are a lot of supportive, helpful aspects found within this Gemini new moon. And all things being equal, it's one of the most positive and harmonious new moons that we have this year in 2025. For those of you in the Eastern time zone as well as Pacific time zone, the Gemini new moon will be taking place on Monday, May 26th. But for others of you in different time zones, it could be taking place on May 27th. One of the reasons that this Gemini new moon can be so helpful and potentially productive is the presence of both Mercury in Gemini as well as Jupiter. Mercury is at home in Gemini. And so the Lord of the lunation being present with the new moon really brings all of the great intellectual and relational and communicative support of Mercury into the new moon, and that ability of Mercury to help guide us through periods of transition and across thresholds of great change. The way Mercury can also help mediate between our inner life and unconscious and our conscious awareness, and turning over different signs and synchronicities we experience to also help us discover greater meaning. This is all going to be important to be paying attention to during this Gemini new moon. But Jupiter, the great benefic, is also still present in Gemini. In fact, this is going to be the last new moon we experience with Jupiter in Gemini. And so Jupiter's presence also adds to that ability of really bringing a lot of abundant inspiration and potential hope and ways to recalibrate and rebalance your vision and develop new meaning to your purpose based upon however things have been changing recently. The other reason that Mercury in Gemini is so important within this new moon is that Mercury is moving in between two pivotal aspects that are fundamental to the way the world is changing so rapidly. Mercury is moving away from a harmonious sextile aspect with Saturn in Aries and Neptune in Aries, and applying very closely to a flowing, airy trine aspect with Pluto in Aquarius. The reason that the harmonious aspects Mercury in Gemini is forming with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, as well as with Pluto in Aquarius, are so important is that the Gemini new moon is marking one of the most important astrological shifts of the entire year. And that is the entrance of Saturn into Aries on May 24th, only a couple of days before the Gemini new moon. When we as astrologers looked ahead to the year 2025, many years ago, we all knew that this would be an incredible, extraordinary year of rapidly moving changes that would very much feel like a new era of time has exploded. And that's certainly been the case. The reason that, one of the reasons at least, there are actually a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons is the fact that Pluto moved from being in Capricorn into Aquarius at the end of 2024. And we knew that Neptune would be moving from Pisces into Aries in March, and that Saturn would be moving from Pisces into Aries in May, and that later Uranus will be moving from Taurus into Gemini in July. These slower moving outer planets from Saturn through Pluto always bring great collective as well as personal changes when they do change signs. And since they would all be doing this within a short period of time, as well as moving from slower, more internally directed signs into fast moving, externally directed fire and air signs. That is another reason why we knew this year would bring so much change. Now, we still have not yet experienced the movement of Uranus from Taurus into Gemini, but this Gemini new moon will be activating the sign of Gemini where Uranus will later enter. And so there may be some life topics associated with your relationship with Gemini that are activated at this new moon that could relate to the changes that come later with that movement of Uranus into Gemini. But the reason the Gemini new moon is especially important is because it is marking the entrance of Saturn into Aries, and the fact that Saturn will be less than 2 degrees away from Neptune in the same sign, the closest that Saturn and Neptune have been together since 1989. The close proximity between Saturn and Neptune will magnify their dissolving impact upon systemic structures and the sweeping changes they bring in borders and boundaries of all sorts, from scientific and technological breakthroughs to dramatic changes in personal worldviews. The cycle of Saturn and Neptune reveals how our collective perception of reality changes across time, delivering a personal reckoning of coming to terms with the death of old dreams and the emergence of new sources of vision. Within the difficulties and challenges and darkness of Saturn and Neptune time periods, we can also resiliently forge new purpose, spiritual faith, and new networks of community support. There can be great disorientation as we must face what is passing away with finality, but within the dissolution, we may experience inspiring breakthroughs that lead to more fulfilling creative directions. While we've already experienced Saturn coming to the end of its cycle with Neptune in Pisces, the new moon in Gemini, along with Mercury in Gemini, will be helping us orient to how the impact of Saturn and Neptune will mutate in the sign of Aries. The first degree of Aries is a world axis point of amplified manifestation in divisible forms. And so the presence of Saturn there with Neptune less than 2 degrees away will inflame movements of change that will separate, divide, and break apart previous orders. Aries is the fall of Saturn, meaning that Aries is a sign that lays Saturn low rather than raising Saturn up to exalted heights. Saturn in his fall carries a symbolism of being humbled or brought down low into a depression in the ground. Yet, since planets in fall are not exalted by the dominant culture, they can also become agents acting on behalf of countercultural perspectives. And in this way, through their underworld experience of incubating within the depths, they can bring ideas and movements that help overturn oppressive power dynamics. As a result, Saturn in Aries can be a more rebellious Saturn who can become infuriated and angered by the setting of limits and constraints more so than we are used to with Saturn. Our collective experience of Saturn and Neptune in Aries will exacerbate the unraveling and unbinding of the previous order and will inflame movements of change. This can be positive and productive when the fiery influence of Aries kindles the courage necessary to take the leap to change your life in meaningful ways, protect what matters most to you, or when you feel emboldened to act decisively and take command of your life direction. Yet, one of the challenges with Saturn and Aries is that Aries will leap ahead impulsively and rush ahead with change, whereas Saturn needs to take time to contemplate decisions and slowly build a secure foundation in order to operate optimally. Thus, we will need to be mindful of not rushing ahead too quickly or burning out from pushing too hard and too fast with Saturn and Aries. We will need to maintain a steady pace with Saturn and Aries that is just fast enough to keep up, but also slow enough to sustain the long distance endurance that will be required in the years ahead, as Saturn will not leave Aries for good until 2028. And so all of this is getting much more heightened as the new moon in Gemini forms. And as Mercury moves from a harmonious aspect with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, it is picking up messages from this new combination we are experiencing of Saturn and Neptune in Aries and weaving it together with our relationship with Pluto in Aquarius that we've already been adjusting to, but now we have this new phenomenon of Pluto in Aquarius forming a sextile with Saturn and Neptune in Aries, which is going to be one big piece of all the big changes coming. And so we are just beginning to adjust to this as we come into this new moon in Gemini. Fortunately, Mercury is that planet that we always want to look to for guidance when we are in these periods of transition and at these crossings of thresholds. And so, since Mercury does help us mediate the unconscious and the conscious, Mercury does help us move away from being stuck or fixated on a certain perspective. And even if Mercury brings us into some kind of frustrating test or challenge, it often in the end helps us realize the ways we need to be more flexible or open our minds to new perspectives or new potential pathways. And so we were just want to be really paying attention to what's going on with this Gemini new moon because we are dealing with this great dissolution of Saturn and Neptune. For some of us, we are going to have to lay to rest the way we would wish things could be and really come more into relationship with what is actually happening. Because the Gemini new moon has Mercury there, because Jupiter's also there, there is potential then to work with what is happening and help co-create that in more of ways that go with what you really do want to create. But first of all, we have to come into relationship with what is actually happening and not the way that we wish things can be. Because although Saturn and Neptune can help us awaken to reality and what is truly going on so we can more effectively work with life and create our life in more fulfilling ways, Saturn and Neptune can also correlate with illusion and trying to escape from reality and what's actually happening. And so, with this Gemini new moon, it's going to be really important to take a grounded, centered look at what is going on and coming up with creative, innovative solutions to address whatever is going on or whatever you do need to take care of. Now, in myth, Hermes was known for donning the invisibility helmet of Pluto. And so it is interesting that as Mercury moves through this flowing trine aspect with Pluto, Mercury is invisible. Mercury is too close to the sun to be seen. And so this is going to further amplify the potency of the imaginal and being able to have all sorts of inspiring ideas and extreme mental activation within the mind. And so, again, that's why we don't want to give in to fear or anxieties, calm ourselves, really embrace the potential of the ideas and information we can be receiving, the communication that we can have with other people, perhaps the support of community members or community networks or powerful alliances that can be forged, potential collaborations. All sorts of things could be happening and coming together here. But it is going to be important that because Mercury is invisible and heading into the sun, we are going to need to also burn off the inessential to come into relationship with the essential and clarify things. Fortunately, Mercury will experience a conjunction with the sun known as the superior conjunction of Mercury a couple of days after the new moon on May 30th. This will take place at 9 degrees of Gemini, and this is a moment of reseeding and reanimation of Mercury, regeneration of ideas, a time to catch hold of an important idea that can be further developed in the months ahead, a time of clarifying what's been happening. This can be a moment to really take advantage of on this particular day. Do some inner meditation, do some journaling, engage in any research. If you've been researching something, for example, and having all these different ideas and maybe too many ideas, we can often experience at this time a burning off and a focalizing of what's like the most important idea to focus on. Now, another reason that so much change has been happening so far in 2025 is the fact that the year began with Mars retrograde in Leo and Cancer, and then immediately transitioned into Venus retrograde in Aries and Pisces. Now, at the time of the Gemini new moon, Mars is still in Leo, the sign where it's stationed retrograde, and Venus is still in Aries, the sign where she's stationed retrograde. But Mars and Venus are both well past the degrees where they station retrograde. They are now picking up speed, moving faster with forward momentum. And within a week of the Gemini new moon on May 22nd, Mars in Leo and Venus in Aries formed a flowing trine aspect. And at the time of the Gemini new moon, Venus in Aries will be moving away from a trine aspect with Mars in Leo into a supportive sextile aspect with Jupiter and Gemini that will become exact on June 4th. This is another supportive aspect of the Gemini new moon for coming to terms with all of the great personal changes we have been experiencing so far in 2025, including whatever relational or mental or economic or vocational challenges and setbacks we've experienced and the ways we've had to adjust to that and regain a sense for what's going on with our life, recenter, and focus forward on the path ahead. And however, we've been developing new senses of our creativity or new senses of our purpose or vocation. That's going to really vary from person to person, but I really like the way the Gemini new moon can help with a process of integration related to however you were reshaped by those previous Mars retrograde and Venus retrograde periods this year. However, before Venus completes the sextile aspect with Jupiter on June 4th, Venus will form a conjunction with Chiron in Aries on June 1st. And at the time of the Gemini new moon, Venus is getting closer to this conjunction with Chiron. And so it will be something going on the week following the lunation. Now, a conjunction between Venus and Chiron is not necessarily going to be comfortable or pleasant, and it may bring up some of the wounds we've experienced during this past year of the Mars retrograde and Venus retrograde, but it could also connect back with wounds from much earlier on in our life. It may have us have to confront aspects of ourself we've been neglecting. And in combination with this, as well as all the other things going on within this Gemini new moon, I think it is going to be important to focus on the inner life, tend to the unconscious realm, tend to any inner vulnerabilities that have been coming up, any parts of yourself that you've been neglecting that are now calling your attention for a new relationship and a new sense of wholeness. Ultimately, this connection between Venus and Chiron that will be coming in the week following the Gemini new moon will make us aware of the parts of ourselves, the wounds, the deeper feelings that we really need to take account of and not try to distract ourselves from, because there's going to be some kind of meaning that we draw out of this Venus Chiron experience that will then be part of regenerating our purpose and our path forward. And so there are numerous ways in which this Gemini new moon can be extremely helpful for clarifying the changes that have been taking shape in your life and getting more focused on the path forward that will be the most fulfilling for you. If you'd like to talk about the way your life has been changing in relationship with all of this extraordinary astrology, my books are open for June. I would love to have an astrology consultation and reading with you. It's the favorite part of my astrological practice. I will put a link below in the description so that you can book a session with me. I'm also going to put a link to my Patreon community. I have an active Patreon community. I would love for you to read more about it. We have monthly meetings depending upon which tier you're on. There are 2 potential classes that you can participate in. And I also share extra material there, including extra video content that I don't share on YouTube. So please check that out. Otherwise, I wish you the best for this brilliant Gemini new moon, and may Hermes deliver you the messages you need to receive.